I'm Chance Storland, and this is the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from ExpressNews.com. Last week, I spoke with my normal co-host, Jabari Young, about the breaking news that Manu Ginobili had decided to hang up his Spurs jersey after 16 seasons, 16 magical seasons, I should add, in San Antonio. Now, at the time, that news was just that day coming out. I mean, this was hitting everybody kind of like a cement truck. It's had some time to settle now, and I'm joined once again by special guest host and San Antonio Express News Spurs beat writer Jeff Mcdonald. Together, we're going to dig even deeper into Manu Ginobili, his history with the franchise, and what this all means for Spurs fans. So, Jeff, great to have you here on the program again. Second time now here on the Spurs Insider. While we were setting up this interview, you mentioned something, and it really struck me. You've been covering Manu Ginobili longer than anyone else, I think. Tell me about that.
I think that would be unofficial, yeah, but I think that's true. You said he played 16 seasons for the Spurs, and I believe if my math is correct, I covered 11 of them, and I don't know that anybody else has done that. That's just kind of an unofficial thing. So, I mean, I'm not saying we're best friends and we're going to go hang out on the beach together now that he's retired, but I spent a lot of time with that guy over the years, and we're basically the same age. I think I'm 1 month older than Manu Ginobili, so we sort of grew up together with the Spurs, you might say.
Man, that's got to be a little disappointing, especially after how well he did this last season, to say you and him are the same age.
Yeah, I can't play like that anymore, and he can. So, Yeah, but that was, just as an aside, that was what was always kind of interesting to me is watching this guy do what he does on the floor. And then, I can barely get out of bed without breaking something or tweaking something or spraining something. And he's out there playing NBA basketball. That was always amazing to me because I know how I felt. I feel day to day just at age 41. I can only imagine what that is like when you're playing 82 NBA basketball games. But I think he's also was and still is in much better shape than I am.
So that, of course, being the case, you're going to get no argument from me. He had a great season, especially for someone of his age. But just, in the NBA, he had a fine season. Did it shock you at all? Or maybe that's not the best way to put it. What was your reaction when you found out that he had decided to call it a day, and that was his NBA career with the Spurs? Obviously, he's older, he has children, he has a family. There are a lot of indicators I'm sure you can go back and maybe say, well, now when we look at it, hindsight's 2020. But what was that initial gut reaction when you heard that Manu Ginobili would no longer be on the court for the Spurs?
It was surprise, and it's weird that the reaction was surprise given everything that you just mentioned, his age and years of service and the family aspect. And the fact that, I think as far back as 2015, I remember the Spurs lost Game 7 to the Clippers in the first round. Their season is over. And I remember talking to Manu in a group after that game at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. And just the way he looked and sounded and talked that night in 2015, I thought he's going to retire this summer. He just sounded like a guy that was done, that knew he was done. He was talking about that night about not being able to keep up with the younger guards in the league, and he was defeated and deflated, and looked like a guy who I thought he was going to be done then. It's the fact that he played 3 more seasons after that, and really 3 more seasons better than that season at age 38 was really interesting. And the fact that I wouldn't have been surprised if he retired in 2015, but then was surprised when he did in 2018. That just seems like something that's so Manu Ginobili.
Let's talk about that. Why do you think he's had so much success these last several seasons, as you just pointed out? What was it? Is there an answer? Will anyone know?
I don't know. I think from talking to him a lot over those years, he sort of figured out how to be an older basketball player. I think every player that plays that long and gets that far past their prime has to struggle through that. Like Tim Duncan had the same sort of thing where there's some years where he looked like he was almost washed up, and then he bounced back and had some great seasons after that. And I think it's a lot of it is your body. You're a star for so long. You're used to being able to do this and that on the court, and your body just responds to what you want, what your brain wants it to do, and what your instincts want it to do. And you're a little more athletic and can keep up with some of the younger players. And I think there's a transition era in there for every player that's going to play into their 40s, where they still want their body to do the same thing, to make the same moves, to make the same plays, but it's just not happening. And it doesn't look right. It doesn't look good. And it takes a while for those guys, I think, to figure out how to be an old man and still thrive on the basketball court. And then the number one thing you can say for anybody that plays that long, whether it's Duncan, Ginobili, think of like a Jason Kidd, someone like that, Steve Nash, they've all got basketball IQs that are off the charts. You can make up for a lot of lost athleticism and quickness and that fast twitch muscle, just by being smart, knowing how to play the game and being kind of wily. And that's what those guys were.
Now, obviously, Manu Ginobili leaving any time in the last several seasons would have been a big deal. I mean, Jabari talked about it. I know that it's been written about at expressnews.com and, of course, in the physical newspaper. The debate of not necessarily the most talented Spur or however you want to label that, but perhaps the biggest fan favorite Spur. That's what's been kind of describing what the Spurs have lost in Manu Ginobili retiring. He's the favorite, and he's not even from the United States. Coming from Argentina. I would love to hear your reaction to how his native country and how the fans have been taking this news. Is it a celebration as well as regret because he's done so much for the team?
Yeah, it's definitely a celebration. I mean, I think as you mentioned, I've been saying and I've lived in San Antonio and followed the Spurs basically since they were terrible in the 80s. And I would say, like, I wouldn't even argue with someone. Manu Ginobili is the most beloved Spur of all time, not the best. Tim Duncan's the best player in Spurs history, but I've never seen – there's very few fan bases that have taken to a singular player like the Spurs fan base took to Manu Ginobili. And a lot of it was just the way he played, the heart that he showed. When he came across in the media, he was funny and gracious and just seemed like a good guy. He just had the heart of a champion. And a lot of – and you can't deny also that part of the fact that part of the reason that he was, so ingratiated to Spurs fans was his Hispanic heritage. This was a star player on the hometown team that spoke the same native language as a lot of the fan base. I mean, San Antonio is one of the most Hispanic markets in the NBA, and to have a guy that spoke their language and would give interviews in Spanish to the local Spanish-speaking stations, that played into it too. I mean, that's something that we'd never had around here before. And so you package all that together, and I've never seen a fan base just gravitate to a player like this fan base gravitated to Manu Ginobili. So I don't think it's a doubt that he's been the most beloved player in Spurs history. People could argue with me, but I've always said that. And, so I think you're getting a lot of that now. There's sort of a celebration of his career and a thank you. I think it's going to hurt a lot of people when the season starts and he's not in uniform. And, then Tony Parker's gone and Tim Duncan's been gone. And, I mean, you look at it, LaMarcus Aldridge came here in 2015, still in many ways feels like a new Spur, and he's the second longest tenured guy on the roster now. I mean, there's been just such turnover the last 2 years that it's really not the same Spurs team that we know. And I think all that is going to be just, when Duncan retired a few years ago, there was a culture shock coming back, but you still had Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, and a lot of these faces that you remembered from the championship era. Most of those are gone. And so I think this culture shock is really going to be pretty obvious when they tip off here in September, October.
Now, we've done a good job so far of talking about, reactions. And, you talk about how even this was surprising for you, even though you can kind of look back and see the signs of maybe why you could have seen something like this was going to come in. But I want to go back a little bit further than that. As you've mentioned, you've been following Manu Ginobili, I think you said for 11 of the 16 seasons. What are some of those memories, or at least when you found out that his NBA career was over, what are the things that came to mind, personal experiences or just kind of your favorite moments with Manu Ginobili? I'm sure there's plenty of them, but what are some of those?
I mean, it's hard. You're not friends with these guys when you cover them, but you spend a lot of time around them. And he was my favorite guy to be around. And so the first thing I thought of was like, it's just not going to be right to not have that guy in my sort of everyday orbit for, 9 months of the year. He was just the guy you always wanted to talk to, the guy that, those old Dos Equis commercials with the most interesting man in the world, like Manu Ginobili was that in the NBA.
Manu could make a great Dos Equis commercial. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Like he speaks 3 languages and just always has some kind of quip. I've written this story a lot, this anecdote a lot, just in various forms in the paper. But one of my favorite Manu Ginobili stories was watching him. It was like in 2010. It was before a game in the locker room, and he's kind of tying his shoes, getting ready to go out. And they had a rookie guard named George Hill, who had just gotten one of these, it was a scam, but it was an ion bracelet that goes around your wrist. And he was just raving about how, it gave him better balance. He thought he was sleeping better and he had more energy during the day. I mean, it's clearly a scam, but he's fallen for it. And now he's given the infomercial. And Manu's just tying his shoes and kind of just looks up at George Hill. And in his 3rd language, Manu Ginobili speaks Spanish, then Italian, and then English. In his 3rd language, he looks up at George Hill and he says, "Hey, George, have you ever heard the word placebo?" And then Manu gets up, runs out to the court, and that's it. And George Hill's like shaking his head like, "No, I have no idea what that means." But Manu got like a pretty good burn in on him in his 3rd language. And so that kind of sums up Manu to me, just very facile with the language, and very just interested. He's basically a tourist in the United States. He's not native here, but just very interested in the history of the place where he's playing basketball. And they'd go to Washington D.C. and he'd take in the museums and the history, and was always looking for like a field trip when they were on the road. I think he took the team out to Elon Musk's place out in California, SpaceX or whatever it's called. Did that last year. I mean, he was just a very interesting guy to be around, and that's the sort of stuff I'm going to miss. Fans probably have their million favorite Manu Ginobili moments on the court, the plays he made, and the things that stick out. But I always remember those behind the scenes things that just sort of made me laugh and appreciate a guy that well-rounded, I guess is the word.
Something that's been making the rounds is how I believe Manu Ginobili has said he's open to kind of staying around with the franchise, I guess in a similar way that Tim Duncan is often described as being around, mentorship. Players will see him in the weight room, that type of thing. What does that actually mean when you stay involved with the franchise? I know that type of thing gets thrown around a lot, but I don't know if people actually break that down and talk about what that exactly means. Is it just kind of like the door's always open and you're always welcome, or is it more concrete of a relationship than that?
Well, with Tim Duncan, it's really just sort of the door's always open. He kind of lives out near the practice facility anyway. Maybe gets bored during the day when the kids are at school, so he can come up to the gym and work out with the team if he wants to, just hang around, talk to some guys, maybe mentor some guys if you look at it that way. And I think Manu would be sort of open to the same thing for as long as he's in town. I don't know this for a fact. I haven't talked to him since he retired, but I think Ginobili also is a guy that with so many interests outside of basketball and travel and that sort of thing that he may not be around San Antonio that much. I don't know. He might travel a little bit more, but I do know he has his kids in school here, or at least enrolled here, starting this fall. So he might pop his bald head around the practice facility a little bit, and we're supposed to talk to him at some point. They're supposed to make him available, and we can all bid him farewell, or I guess in Spanish it would be adios properly. Yeah.
Yeah, Spanish, English, and Italiano, as you were just mentioning. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I didn't really think about that. Obviously, Tim Duncan, quite a different background, different story than Manu Ginobili. But, I mean, Manu Ginobili maybe won't stay in San Antonio. You kind of just brought up that idea.
Yeah, I don't know for a fact, but he's sort of I mean, it's interesting. The Spurs have a way of a lot of guys who'd had no ties here until they came to play for the Spurs end up making their lifelong homes here. I mean, I can name a bunch of them. So maybe Ginobili will do that. I don't know that he'll go back to live in Argentina full time. That he's too much like a Beatle there. Like there's no privacy. There's no way for him to just sort of blend in Argentina, I don't think. I mean, not to say he won't visit and hang out and all that, but I don't know if that's a permanent home for him. But he's just always a guy that's been more interested in travel in the world and what's going on around the globe. That I think he'll do a lot of traveling and be a little nomadic, or as nomadic as you can be, and still have children.
And then finally, Jeff, running out of time, but we do have a few moments left. What can we look forward to with Manu Ginobili? Obviously, his time with the Spurs on the court is over, but he's still there, at least for now, as we just discussed. Who knows where he'll end up? But there's a lot more of him that we'll be seeing. It just won't be maybe in the same context.
Yeah, I think you can probably count on a jersey retirement ceremony at some point in the not too distant future. The Spurs typically, most of the time, it's not the season after you retire that you get your jersey retired, unless you're Tim Duncan, David Robinson, and I would assume Manu Ginobili. A lot of guys, it's 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I don't know this for a fact. I haven't talked to anybody up there about it, but I would assume at some point during this upcoming season, they'll be raising that number 20 to the rafters, and nobody else is ever touching that jersey in silver and black again. He's made it his own, and it was just a remarkable ride. I mean, maybe you guys talked about it last week, but the 57th pick in the 99 draft, second to last guy picked in the 99 draft, becomes a 5-time NBA champion, and in many ways, or 4-time NBA champion, and in many ways, the heart and soul of those teams, at least the last few. And a Hall of Famer. I mean, he's going to the Hall of Fame. And I think there was some kind of talk on Twitter after Manu retired from people that I think are a little uninitiated, thinking like, well, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. No, that guy's going to be on the first ballot. He's going to be elected on the first ballot based on his NBA resume. But just to bolster that, the fact that he was the Michael Jordan of Argentina and led that ragtag group to a gold medal in Athens in 2004. I mean, you put his whole resume together. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I think most people who have followed the sport believe that. So I think you're going to see a jersey retirement ceremony, and I think you're going to see a Naismith Hall of Fame speech sometime in the next few years.
Perhaps with a sprinkling of Spanish, Italian, and English. Yeah, who knows what'll happen.
There you go. You need a translator for some of it.
That's right. Quite a qualified translator at that. Well, Jeff, it's been fun. Obviously everybody's been talking about Manu, but everybody brings their own spin to this, and I'm glad that we were able to do another episode because, once everything settles, and, there's the celebration, and then there's the disappointment. Oh man, Manu's not going to be around anymore. It's nice to give it a more holistic look, and I think we did that today. So, San Antonio Express News Spurs beat writer Jeff Mcdonald joined me once again here on the podcast. Let's have you again soon, man.
Anytime, man. I'm around.
And at least for now, I think that's going to wrap it up for our Manu Ginobili coverage here on the Spurs Insider, our weekly NBA podcast from expressnews.com. And once again, thank you to San Antonio Express News Spurs beat writer Jeff Mcdonald. Always nice to have a fresh face here on the podcast. Perhaps we'll have Jabari Young next week or another sports writer from the San Antonio Express News. Only time will tell. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.